denial. And, so that's why I was compelled to write things like what we're up against, because I just thought, okay, like, I just wish more people knew this stuff, and maybe they're not going to sit down and read these books, and maybe I can just sort of put together what I've gained from them. And what I didn't pay enough attention, what I haven't been paying enough attention to, and other people have, is the more recent manifestations of this stuff. So, and I think that somebody that's very important here, if you want to sort of get up to date, is called Gil Duran. And one of the reasons he's up to date is because he's from San Francisco. And the tech brothers and Silicon Valley billionaires have been experimenting in San Francisco and trying to take it over in a very anti-democratic way for a while. And so he was just sort of seeing this happening and reporting on it. And now they've taken it, nationwide in the US very, very fast. They basically piled on Trump. So apparently, as soon as Trump decided that J.D. Vance was his running mate, that's when they were basically like, that was the bat signal for the tech billionaires, including Peter Thiel, including Elon Musk, and a whole raft of other ones. I don't necessarily even know their names, to sort of jump on board with this. And so their ideology and what they want in the world is actually weirder and even in some cases worse than what the authoritarian-minded neoliberals want. They have all kinds of, it's almost so bizarre. It's not an ideology. It's there's not everybody will have read my stuff, but hopefully everybody has watched The Wire. They're getting high on their own supply, basically. So they have this idea that government is like software and it's time for a reboot. So they're sort of trying to bring, they have no understanding of history. They have no understanding of politics. They have no understanding of social anything. And they're just trying to change the functioning of a whole country, a whole democracy, and even the world, the planet, as though it were a software startup. And they're having these analogies like the president is the CEO. And the whole thing is kind of bonkers. And so that's the thing that's sort of that I'm trying to catch up. And I think a lot of people are trying to catch up now, because they're basically running with these wild ideas. And I don't think it's possible to counter them very effectively if we don't know something of what they're about.
Brilliant, brilliant. That really picks up a lot of the threads, both obviously from the two pieces, but also from some of the questions that are still to come. So I think one or two parts of that we'll be returning to. I had a couple of questions stacked up first, but I think I'll just drop in one more, and then I know we've got a few other people here who are going to come up and ask questions in turn, and then I'll save the third one for the end because it feels like a better question for the end. I feel like this is one that's good to ask now, so that we've got the next half hour to unpack where this leads and not just drop it in at the end. One of the things that first really engaged me with your writing was what you wrote about Gaza being the blueprint for the coming century. And several of us more recently have been reading Omar al-Akkad's book, One Day Everybody has always been against this. And there's a phrase that he uses in there which felt so powerful to me, which is, he talks about the muscles of indifference, and that the blueprint, as I understand what he's saying, the real blueprint for us in the kind of sheltered Western economies is the indifference that's cultivated in the face of Gaza. That once you're getting used to that, you can get used to anything. And I wondered if you had anything more to say on that thread. For the first question I would have asked when I came in, but you can take it any way you want, is what do you think the climate movement needs to learn from Gaza?
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of things to learn. And for me, a lot of the commonalities that I was seeing between, basically when Israel started attacking Gaza, I basically hit pause on all the climate stuff I was doing. And it was just like, this needs to stop, and hopefully we can get it to stop soon. So that's what I want to spend my efforts on, is exposing what's happening here. And then I realized that was, it was just wild how unsuccessful we were. And one of the things that really made me despair is like, how are we going to stop the climate crisis if we can't stop a genocide being live streamed. Like, it's just, it's extraordinary. You have people there bearing witness to what they're going through every single day, to what's happening every single day, explaining where it's coming from, explaining what's happening. And none of it is percolating into action. None of it is percolating into stopping it. It's just been this horrible realization that our governments just don't care, or in fact are supporting the other side. And also that the media, to some extent, like they've been doing, I don't want to make the analogies too strong, but you know, at this point, they're getting very good at ignoring disasters. Like, they just are very comfortable with it. And it comes from the editors often. So this is something I've heard from several journalists, is that this stuff doesn't sell so much. You know, what are you going to say? Things are still bad in Gaza. The climate's still bad. You know, like, well, it's not new. It doesn't sell. So we're not going to cover it. So it's just like being failed by lots of different organizations that are supposed to be protecting, you know, that are supposed to be sort of our nervous system and our reaction system, like informing us about the world and stopping us from harm. And so I think that one of the things to learn is that, you know, indifference and ignorance are manufactured. It is entirely possible for things to get really, really bad and for nothing to change, or things just to get worse. And it's possible to demonize a set of people to the extent that their harm and obliteration is normalized. And all of these things can happen to anybody, anytime. And just in terms of the muscles of indifference, I think that this is something that neoliberalism has been cultivating for a while. There's basically, it probably goes further back. It probably goes to like early ideas in economics. So one of the things that we don't think enough about is how economics as a science was sort of developed as a colonial tool of management. And one of those things you have to be comfortable with is exploiting other people and sort of having lack of consideration for other people. But this is certainly accelerating. And the economics that we have teach us, you know, we have this ideology that teaches us that we are selfish. It teaches us a certain view of human nature. We are selfish. We are incapable of cooperation. We only want with things that are for our own interest. You know, so it tells us a certain view of what people are supposed to be. And that view then becomes internalized, and it then becomes the way people react. They say, you know, I can't care about Gaza. I'm just trying to care about myself. And that's the normal thing for everybody to do. So, and then that becomes the same about climate. It's like, oh, well, I'm just trying to save myself. I can't worry about all this other stuff. And that's a view that's cultivated, and it's cultivated deliberately. And the example of this that, and then I'll stop talking, but I was reading the biography of James Buchanan, who is the economist who did public choice theory, and he got a Nobel Prize in economics, and he wrote the Chilean constitution. He went to Chile for like 7 weeks and helped them write the constitution for Augusto Pinochet. That's the kind of thing neoliberals do. And that constitution had a deadline. It was supposed to end. And then there were going to be elections. And they basically calculated the time it was supposed to end, because that would be the time when enough generations would have gone through the school system where they were indoctrinated in this neoliberal economic thought, that then they would safely vote for the continuation of this economic system. That's the way they calculated it. So I think that this whole sort of exercising indifference, considering ourselves to be selfish, incapable of reflection, incapable of cooperation, capable of all of this stuff, is something that is definitely very much pushed, but that people start to internalize, and then they start to really act like they must act that way, really. Anyway, it's a problem, for sure.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. We've got questions from Alex and Phil, and then I know we've got Manda, Oliver, and Martin have also asked a question.
Okay.
Is anyone else sitting on a question as well? We've got about 5 lined up, so we could just see how we got on with those. Alex, do you want to come up, or do you want to lean our point?
Hi. Well, thanks. I read a few points for the left, and I thought it was a really, really interesting article, and sort of it gives voice to a lot of things I've been thinking as well. So I think I haven't had time to sort of prepare this as well as I wanted to, but I think you're sort of talking about the repetition at the beginning of things and people keeping repeating the same things, what we're against. And I think it comes from a comfort because everyone can agree what we're against. Everyone can agree. You can say the same thing about neoliberal capitalism being bad. And that's quite a comfortable thing because everyone is going to agree with that in every space. What becomes difficult and becomes more uncomfortable is when you start to talk about what are actual methods to deal with it. And the second that happens, I think that's when the sort of leftist infighting sort of starts to happen. People have disagreements over what is actually going to happen. And so I'm wondering, how do you see a sort of new left build a mass movement of people united under a goal of what we actually want to achieve when you have so many different ideas of how to achieve it? How do people work together? Despite that, when the kind of the classic thing would be class, but class is so different now than it was like 100 years ago, or maybe not, like, yeah. So that's kind of how do we work together under so many different banners, so many different ideologies?
Well, that's a really big question. And I don't have any good answer to it. It's actually a question that we're facing in my project right now, in our research project, because we have people coming from very different sort of political and geographic and whatever horizons, and we're trying to come up with some way of agreeing on at least some ways forward or educating each other on it. And I think that maybe that's one of the things, is to just sort of have some kind of literacy or understanding as to what the different strains are, what their core beliefs are, and where the disagreements come from. And there's some things that are really hard to deal with. For instance, if you're from an anarchist strain, there's a lot of ignorance about anarchism, and there's a lot of how would you say it? There's a lot of prejudice about what anarchist organizing. I mean, a lot of people don't even believe that anarchist organizing is a thing, which is absolutely wrong. And what it consists of, and why it does the things why anarchists do things a certain way or think a certain way. And I think that having more familiarity and respect with people's directions in terms of organizing and the way they see change happen would be quite helpful. Because it's also like people, I think that a lot of the disagreements are sort of buried in history in terms of bad things that happened that weren't really resolved. And then everybody's always like, oh, well, of course we didn't do things perfectly because we were being attacked by the American Empire, because this, because that. Is like, yeah, that's true. It doesn't help. But we also just need to, we need to have open discussions about what these different tactics are and how at least to disagree about them more intelligently. Because I think a lot of the disagreements stay at a surface level, as opposed to just going down to, okay, I think your ideas are flawed because they're going to lead us in this direction and have these problems with them. And the fact is that nobody's got the perfect recipe. Nobody has all the strengths. Nobody has all the weaknesses. And we do, in fact, need to sort of compose as we go along and learn from all the different traditions there are. So I think that would be just, a bit more respect and a bit more willingness to understand what the strong and weak points might go somewhere. But I do not have the solution to this. It is not easy. Obviously, nobody's done it yet, really. Or yeah, when there's movements, people come together, but it's not obvious. Yeah.
Phil, do you want to pick up from there?
Yeah.
I don't think it's affecting Julia, actually. It's
Yeah.
How is it? Trying to work out.
It's just a banner that says the meeting's being recorded, so we can't see ourselves.
Ah, okay.
No big deal. Hi Julia, thanks for speaking to us. My original question was actually quite similar to Alex's, so I'm going to change it if that's all right. That's all right.
If you have a better answer, let's hear that too, right?
It's really difficult. I was going to ask more about how the left can reclaim the narrative, because it feels like everything's being controlled by the right in 2025. But I don't know, there's also no real answer to that. So I'm going to ask a different one. But if you want to speak to that idea as well. So despite being involved in climate activism for years now, I do still find myself quite skeptical of renewable energy developments globally, but also here in Cornwall. So the question is, how can we communicate or action the need for a rapid transition away from fossil fuels without ceding to the continuation of extractivism and environmental racism?
Oof. Okay. I'd almost prefer the narrative one.
Oh, you can go for that one as well.
So I think there's okay, here's the thing. There's no easy solutions. I'm speaking here so from a like background physicist doing the math. There's 8+ billion people on the planet. That means that certain ways of life are impossible. So it is not possible to sort of everybody live off the land in small holding farms or even like it is not like the way back towards a more symbiotic or harmonious relationship to nature is not in the cards when we have 8+ billion people, because we need to rely heavily on agriculture. That's the basics for food. And we just have to hope that climate change is not so bad that it's not going to interfere massively with agriculture, which is definitely the biggest risk. And then we need industrial activity to keep that agriculture going. And we also need industrial activity to keep our lifestyles, our level of health, our living standards the way they are. Otherwise, we are talking about mass misery and death, which I don't think is okay. So, and that means that we need a certain amount of, in order to be okay, we need a certain amount of energy, all of us, to do things like, keep our food safe, keep our environment, housing environment, whatever, safe, all the basic things we need. This is something that is actually my topic of research, and it's something that also Narasimha Rao of Yale University has been working on, which is decent living standards. Long story short, we need energy to have the basics of a comfortable, harm-free life. However, that energy is not very much because the good news is technologies have been getting a lot better in terms of efficiency. Now, normally efficiency gets turned through the normal economic churn into more growth and more waste and more stupid stuff. But actually, if we did have an economy that chose to prioritize human well-being, we could do a lot better with a lot less. And we see some countries doing a lot better with a lot less. So what that means is we could live better. We estimated that, if everybody is living at decent living standards and not more, we could do it with less than half the energy that we use now. That's the great news. Now, that energy needs to move. So this is a sort of ideal world because there's no inequality, or maybe it's a nightmare world because there's no inequality. It depends what your political orientation is. But so that's a possible world in terms of technology. However, it does require energy production. It requires a lot less energy production than if we continue very wasteful uses of it and we continue sort of growth in demand for all kinds of stupid purposes, including AI or whatever. But it does require energy, and that energy should be renewable. So the point is, renewable energy is necessary. Renewable energy is great. It is cheap. It is effective. It reduces air pollution. It does all kinds of things in quite a wonderful way. It is the cheapest form, like for instance, solar photovoltaic in sub-Saharan Africa is the cheapest kilowatt hour that humanity has ever produced on Earth, and that has to mean something. So it's kind of cool. However, it does require some kind of extractivism. That extractivism could happen in better or worse ways. Right now, it's certainly happening in worse ways, and it's certainly But the point is, if we go towards sufficiency and efficiency, which means no overconsumption or reducing overconsumption and making sure that the consumption that's necessary happens efficiently, then we would need a lot less deployment of renewables, a lot less extractivism than we would in another scenario. So we are talking like, you know, large multipliers different. And I think that that's what we need to aim for. So that's my answer around extractivism. Is extractivism colonial? Yes. Extractivism would be less colonial if we actually gave the management of the mines to the populations who live there. And maybe they would choose not to mine, or maybe they would choose to mine differently. But the problem with the coloniality of it is a question of ownership and management, and it being large multinationals or companies that don't have a responsibility to the local community. And one easy way to change that would be to change ownership structures. Yeah. So that's not maybe a comfortable answer. In terms of the narrative, I actually think we have a great narrative that we could be putting forward. It's a narrative around a different form of human nature, around actually that resembles our own human nature much better, about being cooperative, about being capable, about being able to take control of our own destiny through organizing and mutual aid and yeah, so all the things that people are really, really good at doing, and saying that we can actually do this and we can work to make each other's lives better as opposed to worse. So I think that we could have that kind of narrative. It has not been put forward by current left parties because I don't think that the mainstream left parties are having a hard time being really left. Let's put it that way. So this is not a comfortable narrative for them to put forward, in my view.
Thank you.
Okay, well then Manda, you okay if we'll Nick.
Yeah, so my question is, we've talked a lot about human beings. It's very human-centric, this whole discussion so far. I want to bring in the non-human and, you know, the planet and the sea, the mountain, the rivers, the species on the planet. Is there not a way that we can use our own narrative should be about those species, those animals, and the devastation of wildlife? Because unfortunately, or fortunately, a lot of people on the right do actually like to think they're conserving some nature. And yes, there's a colonial side to that, but there's also potentially a narrative that we can put forward to say, in order to protect orangutans and so forth, we need to pull together. And is that, I just wondered what your views are on that.
I think well, I wish, I don't know. I mean, also, I'm not an expert on, I mean, there's some things I'm an expert on, then I'll say I work on this stuff, I know a bit about it. Other things I'm much less of an expert, and I'm not a great politics narrative expert, so I haven't tested this officially or whatever. I have seen a lot of experiences that people have tried to make of trying to appeal to the conservative aspect of conservatives. And I have found it, I mean, I think for individuals, it might work. For a given person, it might work. In general, they are being, but I don't think I don't think it can work so well overall, partly because their political parties and their political movements are very much beholden to a certain ideological direction that does in fact have human control of nature. And that's why the Silicon Valley, the Silicon Valley delirium about what the environment is. So basically, you know, Elon Musk, who's running the US government right now, really has this fundamental belief that Earth is sacrificable. You know, he doesn't care about Earth. He doesn't care about climate change. And a lot of them don't, because they've convinced themselves that that's just a hardware change. I mean, I swear to God, these people are so fundamentally stupid that it is frightening how much power they have. Because we have one planet and this is what we live. We are part of the life of the planet. We are not anything different. But they really, I think they really see the whole planet as sacrificable. And they have their own religious belief, which has to do with them in the place of God, which is really, and AI is God, and like planet, you know, space AI is the destiny of humanity. It's all extremely frightening, and they really believe their own stuff. They are really getting high on their own supply. But in terms of appealing to right wing or to conservatives through that lens, I have not seen it work real well, unfortunately. Sadly. I think it has, and it has been tried, yeah.
Well, we can keep circling these round, but Manda, do you want to, if you speak up, you can probably.
Thanks, Julia. First of all, thank you for keeping the lights on in Twitter for as long as you did, and then realised that it was too dark, and now we see you on blue sky. So thank you very much for all that you have been doing. It was a question really about sustenance, I suppose. How do we, as positive deviants or tempered radicals or creative disruptors, Roomful here and yourself, have been learning a lot about how we sustain that effort, and it's about communication and collaboration. It's about self-care. It's about understanding this is about the process, not always about the outcome. But it feels like everything is changing now so quickly, and it's become unpredictably unpredictable. I wondered if you had any other thoughts on how we maintain ourselves and that movement forward when it seems so dark. Are we missing anything?
Well, there's more of you in the room than me, so you're obviously better at the whole movement thing and at coming together and discussing these questions. And I would certainly try to hold on to that. The thing that I find comfort in is understanding trying to understand what's going on. So trying to use my brain to figure out what the heck is actually behind these trends. What are people really trying to achieve? Do they actually mean the words they say, or do they mean something different that we need to take more close attention to? And so I think that in terms of things moving fast, there are people who understand. So like Gil Duran, he doesn't understand, everything about the world, but he understands a heck of a lot about the Silicon Valley billionaires and what they're pushing forward and what we're seeing develop now in the US. I don't know how popular they are in Europe. They are somewhat popular. So and I guess another thing is I don't know how much we need to go into the weeds on this, but there's a lot of connections between what they're doing and the world of cryptocurrency, which is basically, a large way to do corruption. It's a large way for them to get money into. There was this whole crypto scam where they funneled money into Trump. Any politician or anybody who says, hey, cryptocurrency is great at this point, you can be absolutely sure is just out for the take, right? They're just looking for ways to be corrupted and saying this shop is open for corruption. So that's a pretty easy thing to discuss at this point. But I think we need to be aware of what this opposition is about, what its goals are, take it really seriously. And one of the things we need to do is, because people are pissed off and angry and upset and confused, but a lot of people do not have either the opportunity or the mental capacity to understand this stuff and to go out and find these pieces of information. There's a lot of information lacking. There's a lot of stuff that's just not being explained well by the media. And, maybe we're the kinds of people who scrounge around online to find who's got the answers that make sense to us and put the pieces together. But a lot of people do not have the wherewithal and the capacity to do that. And I think that there's a big communicative opportunity in terms of organizing, just explaining to people, this is what's going on, put out a little one-page newsletter, the madness this week, and just sort of try to help people put the pieces together. I used to do this kind of thing back in the days when we were protesting against the Iraq War, which of course we did not win when we protested against the Iraq War. Spoiler alert, things went really badly, but it was something that people responded to well when we did protests or we were just out leafleting. People just really like to have some kind of fact stuff, these little fact points. It was just 10 facts or 5 facts or questions and answers or whatever. And then with links and with ways that people could get more information. And people are really hungry for information. They're hungry for meaning. They don't understand what the heck is going on. And so that's something that I think we need to be doing a lot more of, is sort of training people to understand and become part of movements, start trusting themselves and our collective capacity to do things again. So if that's something.
Yeah, thanks, Wanda. Great question. Oliver, do you want to
Hi, Julia. Hello. Can you hear me all right?
I can. I'm not sure I can see. Oh, yes, I can see you. Yeah. Hi.
I can't see myself, so I hope you see me.
Yeah.
No, you're right there. You're right there.
Number one is just to say exactly what Amanda said. Thank you for everything you do. Thank you. You may have already answered my third. I've got three questions in one. Really.
Okay.
So it's like just to return to the point about Gaza as a blueprint for the future. So the first question is, for those Palestinians who survived the genocide, do you anticipate them being removed, displaced from Gaza? That was the first question. The second question is, if you do think that, what impact do you think that will have on the balance of power in the Middle East? And the third question, related to both of the other two, is how do we resist that? I think you may just have answered the third question.
I wish. I do not know I don't know what's going to happen in Gaza. So if in terms of understanding the region or in terms of understanding what's going on, I would certainly recommend well, for just other people, basically, like other people have real expertise on the region and its politics and the movements there. So one of the ways I've been learning about it is through the people who are invited on the fire these times. There's a podcast by a collective. It was started by my friend Elia Ayub, and who's actually in Bristol right now. So he's actually local to you guys. You're lucky to have him close by. And they have lots of guests and talk about the issues from the periphery with people from different countries in that area and around the world. And there are others as well that are quite important that are escaping me right now. But so I am not a specialist on the region. So I shouldn't speak to the politics there. I think what I do know is that, because one of the things that's sort of been baffling to people is, lack of Arab solidarity. But the fact is that the Arab countries, with Egypt and with others, have very much been themselves sort of pressured and bought off, including having the Arab Spring being crushed, dissidents being crushed, different movements with people ending up in jail. So they've had their own internal politics and repression, and are sort of, so the question of what the civil society would want or what movements there would want, like the people there would want, they have their own reasons to be afraid to speak out. And in terms of geopolitics, in terms of the international scene, they're very much caught between a rock and a hard place, because they're facing very strong military powers, and they can't really, I guess their leaders don't feel that they can disobey that much. So if they're gone, and if the US has been pressuring them to normalize relationships with Israel, which happens a lot, then they don't really feel that they can go against that without risking a huge amount in terms of their own geopolitical stability. So there's really a lot of very big players. I mean, one of the craziest thing to me that happened, I mean, it was a beautiful thing that happened, was the fall of Bashar al-Assad in Syria, which is amazing. I mean, Bashar al-Assad has been has made Syria one of the worst hellholes for decades, and his father before him. I mean, Israel is really bad, but Syria, in terms of the prisons, for instance, but Syria, they wouldn't let the Red Cross into the prisons. They were just like these tortured death camps. Anyway. But the Syrians were finally able to overthrow Bashar al-Assad. Why? Because Israel bombed the heck out of Hezbollah in both Iran and Lebanon. So Hezbollah was weakened. Hezbollah was helping support Bashar al-Assad. And the regional powers were sort of paralyzed. So Iran was paralyzed. Russia's off fighting a war in Ukraine. And then all of a sudden, there's no one left to prop up Bashar al-Assad. And basically, he got on a flight to Moscow, and that was it. That's the last the Syrians ever had to hear about him, hopefully. So the thing is that the only liberation that could happen was when the powers didn't care enough anymore. And I don't see that happening with Gaza. It's too important. Geopolitically, they won't benefit from they have no chance of benefiting from the oblivion or forgetting. You know, nobody's just going to forget about them and let them do their own thing. That's just not going to happen. So I think their only chance is really large scale international pressure, boycott, divest, sanctions, just keep the pressure on, insist on the International Criminal Court and the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice, and their injunctions being obeyed. You know, just keep on the international pressure. So that's clear that the Palestinians don't have much else to hope for than that. In terms of displacement and removal, I don't know if that's in the cards. If that could ever be, you know, that's not up to us. I mean, it would be a mass crime, right? I don't know. It's really hard to think of a good way forward, but the only good way forward there could be would be through international pressure. I guess one more thing to say is that the Trump cabinet is full of the most Zionist extremist nutcases that there has ever been, like people who love the settler movement. They're violent, they're insane, they're religious fanatics, and it's a really bad scene. Not that Biden or Harris were great, of course, just that Trump is obviously full on.
Thank you. Could I just ask you for the name of that podcast again?
The Fire These Times.
Fire These Times.
Yeah, it's after a James Baldwin essay. It's after he talks about Noah, no more water. When God looks back, catches up with Noah again, he says, no more water, the fire these times.
Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. We've got a question from Martin, and then I've got one to close. Can you speak from over there? Are you good?
Yeah. So changing the subject a bit, my question is, what are the prospects of a global financial collapse? Kevin Bendale suggests the powers that be might pull the plug deliberately. And I suppose as a rider to that, I'm wondering what Trump's manoeuvres might mean in this context. I mean, is it a return to protectionism, or is there more method in his madness than that?
I don't think. Oh, wow. Okay. So, so one of the things that's kind of fun about reading up about neoliberalism, and especially, I mean, there's a whole bunch of books I would recommend. The first one is by Wendy Brown, In the Ruins of Neoliberalism, which is sort of their ideas, and it explains everything very well. And that's a great book. But then there are these histories. There's The Globalists by Quinn Slobodian, and another one is Democracy in Chains by Nancy MacLean. And both in Globalists and in MacLean's, both in the Globalist book and in Democracy in Chains, there are these events in history where somehow a neoliberal true believer fanatic gets the reins of power or a large administration or whatever, and finally has the dream to put their money where their mouth is and put their plan into operation, and crashes the thing within weeks and is just out the door within weeks. And it just has happened over and over in history. It happened recently in the UK, right, with Liz Truss. And just having, her vision of economics, and just like, destroying a bunch of pension funds, and everybody just sort of running from in flames, Westminster in flames, and then she was out. But so the people surrounding Trump are the true believers. So it's actually a combination of three factions of true believers of various insane cults. One of them is the neoliberal economic movement, as funded by Charles Koch, as represented by the Heritage Foundation, as written up in Project 2025, right? That is their plan. But there are other plans. There's a plan of the Silicon Valley tech bros, who donated way more money to Trump than the fossil fuel industry. So they're really and they have their own plan. And that was also written up, and I think it's called Project Butterfly or something like that. I think it has butterfly in the title. And then there's the religious fanatics who are also in there. And they don't have a coherent economic plan that is capable of not crashing the world economy. So yes, there might be a financial crisis. I mean, certainly various economies are going to be destroyed. People's livelihoods are being destroyed, et cetera. They're creating a lot of instability. The question is there any force capable of stopping them from doing this? There's voices from the not insane part of the US economy saying, stop doing this, stop the tariffs, stop trying to say we shouldn't be, trading agricultural goods because our agriculture is entirely based on trade, et cetera. I don't know if they're going to win out or not. I don't know what it's going to take. So at this point, I think it's anybody's guess. I don't think that they're planning to crash the world economy deliberately, but they might just feel quite comfortable doing so. Because they themselves come from large fortunes. They think that their large fortunes are safe from whatever else the world is doing. They don't necessarily see themselves as tied to the rest of the economy. And they think that they'll have more power. So that's one of the things that's very dangerous right now, is they don't want stability because they think that they have come so far that they are able to profit from instability and misery. So they think that they will be able to profit even from a crash or disasters. And that makes them economically even more unsafe, I would say. But yeah, they're insane. I don't know how to guess what would stop them, if anything.
Thanks. Thank you, Julia. We've got one more question from Ilya, and then I'll ask a wrapping question to close.
As you say, things seem to be moving really quickly and a bit insanely. How do you help yourself not to become overwhelmed? So I think we're all at risk of that. I know I
am. Well, it helps not being in the US right now. How does one? I think that I don't know. I think maybe I mean, I don't know what's saying. Yeah, these are all very personal questions in some sense. It's like how do we keep going? I was once depressed, okay, and I felt like I saw the world way more clearly than when I was sane. So I think sanity is dealing with, for me, that the lesson from that was that sanity means dealing with hardship and misery and sort of the state of the world in a way that you're still able to go and wake up in the morning and sort of feel up to the task of doing the things you need to do. And it's nice to be able to do that, but it might not be purely rational. So if you need to be a bit insane to get going, and you need to be a bit, to realize that there might be a bit out of phase in terms of the reality of things, I think that's fine. I think that's a bit normal. I think one of the things that does help me is just trying to understand better. There are people out there who have been reading into this, who have been studying it, who have a lot of really interesting things to say about what this moment means and how we can get out of it. Naomi Klein is one of them. Gil Duran is another. There's a bunch of these people, and listening to them helps, because if we understand our situation, we can think about how to react. Being in a group like you are, you have a lot of capacity. The number, it only takes like 4 or 5 people keeping each other going to win campaigns. It really is that simple, that you can actually just keep working together. Don't take no for an answer. Think of the next thing, help each other out, keep going. Doing it on your own is pretty tough and or impossible. But as a group, you really have a lot of capacity. So I would say stick together, think of things you can do. And for you, for your community, and that's what actually carries people through. Maybe I can just end with an example of I learned about this stuff. The context is not interesting. It turns out that hurricanes go through, the south of the US, hitting the East Coast, and they also go through places like, Puerto Rico and Cuba. So Cuba is right in hurricane, like the hurricanes crash through Cuba all the time, and they're really strong. And what's interesting is that the US, a highly developed economy, blah, 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 always has way more deaths for the same strength hurricane than Cuba does. And it's not a question of technology. It's not a question of GDP per capita. The thing that allows Cuba to withstand these hurricanes is social systems. They have like little neighborhood groups who know, like when there's an evacuation order, everybody knows they have a plan. So when there's an evacuation order in the US, it's like, get out if you're white and you have a car. If you're black and you don't have a car, you might as well stay and die. That's sort of the evacuation plan in the US. So they really have collective systems where, you know, somebody goes around with a minivan and picks up all the people who are known to have broken legs, the pregnant women, the old people who aren't able to get out on their own. Like they have lists of all the vulnerable people and they just pick them up and take them to the safe space to wait out the hurricane. So they just have like having resilient community systems where you guys figure out systems, ways to help each other out and not let each other down. That is immense. That is a fantastic strength. And so you can't underestimate that. That's a really big thing.
Standing, and I think that's kind of preempted the answer to my last question, really. We're not here as a particular campaign. In fact, as a community here in Cornwall, it often feels to me like campaigns are like waves breaking through, and the same community kind of come together around one or the other. Ecological Citizenship is a peer learning network. That's what we call ourselves. And one of the things that really chimed for a lot of us with your work was the emphasis on warmth. And the difference between a kind of pro-social friendliness, which is kind of appreciative of your good work, and something more basic, which is like finding a space where people hold you, recognize you, where you're glad to be in the company of those people and travel together. So in a way, that's not really a question, that's a thank you, because it was just articulated really well in that piece, a few points of that. And we were talking before the talk as well about at what scale that can happen. You know, can you have mass movement warmth? Is warmth a thing that can happen in a big way? And I wondered, with respect to that thread in your work, and if that's too vague, just go with anything. I wondered where would you point to where that's being got right? Where do you see around you that kind of resistance looking after each other? And I think that's why I said I think you preempted it, because I think that hurricane response you talked about is a wonderful example of it. But I just wondered that terms of companionship, being good company to each other.
I think it's about creating culture. So I think one of the things we have to realize is that there was a cultural creation. So the neoliberals from Hayek, Friedman, and all that, they helped create a culture of selfish helplessness, basically. And it is possible to create other cultures of recognition, of warmth, of working together, of learning how to work together, learning how to talk to each other, learning how to disagree, all the kinds of things that we need to do in societies, and that we're actually pretty good at. David Graeber has some really nice, the late great David Graeber has some really nice pieces on how he enjoys meetings, because that's when you see what humans are. I think that's still pretty strange, but I think so I think it is possible to create these other cultures, and a lot of it is about giving people confidence. And that's something where we can actually, this is very strange for me to say, but I think we can really learn from the way the communist parties and the Leninists organized themselves. Is they had this sense of training and belonging. You train somebody into an organization. You say, listen, I believe in you. I think you're worth being part of this group. I think you're going to be a valuable addition to this group, and we're going to do great things together. And that means that there's some things you need to learn about the way we work, about the way we understand the world. And we're going to teach you that stuff because you are worth teaching. And I think that this question of training, like any time somebody comes into a community, whether it's a work community or a hobby community or whatever, there's always this aspect of learning and training. And maybe that's something that we need to take a bit more seriously, is go out to people and say, hey, do you want to be part of this? We'll help you in. We've got a program. You can come talk to us. You can come learn stuff. We're doing things together. You know, you are worth being part of this. And we think that you can really make a huge difference if we do stuff together. And giving, I think that that's something that we probably don't do enough. It's kind of like, oh, well, either you get it or you don't, you know? It's like, maybe that's not quite good enough. Yeah. But thanks so much for inviting me. It was very lovely. I wish I could be in the room with you one day. I've got dear friends who moved from Manchester to Cornwall. So thank you so much. And enjoy the rest of the evening.
Thank you so much. And just to repeat, you know, more broadly, thank you for the great work you're doing.
I'm flabbergasted by this, but it is very nice to hear. And you keep going. Cheers, Matt. Cheers, everybody. Bye-bye.